Everyone, thank you for joining us once again for another one of our fantastic Greek Wine Club webinars. We have the trio here. Actually, let's not include me. We have the duo of the wine gurus. So let me introduce first my co-host, Foti Stamos. Hello, Foti. How are you?
I'm doing much better with that great introduction.
You think? Wow. Okay.
Absolutely. But as you did say, always excited to put on these amazing and fun webinars, and it makes it much more fun with our, I'm going to call him our co-host because he's been with us for so long.
Can we make it official already?
Yeah, I was like, don't even call him co-host. He's the host and we're the co-hosts.
There you go. All right, we made it official.
I want to start. I'm going to send my application in. Are you guys hiring? Be the trio.
Send it to
well, you're Greek, so Greeks don't need applications. It's just connections, right? But let's welcome Johnny Livanos. Johnny, thanks for joining us. Thanks for putting on another amazing segment where in this episode, we get to really get to know not just the faces, but the individuals, the soul that's behind today's wine renaissance in Greece.
Yes.
Johnny, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. There's a lot that most folks don't really realize what it takes. But I think this is a great opportunity to break it down and kind of give us a little bit about who's who and what's going on.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about Greek wine together, and we have a lot of segments we've done in the past together, showcasing the regions, the grapes, the wineries, but it's really the people that make this story possible. People like you and me as well, because we are ambassadors, we talk about it, but the winemakers that we work with at Diamond Wine Importers are some of the most important pioneers of the Greek wine renaissance. And I like to call it a renaissance because Greece has been making wine for thousands of years. And in the 60s, 70s, it started to take off. But it really wasn't until the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s that the wine industry started to really blow up. And let me get some dates here. I think it was in the 80s, or there was only about like 60 wineries in Greece. And then that number has exploded to now there's over 1,600.
Oh my gosh.
So the trend really started, and it was as a result of a few key players, a few key people really pushing the envelope, showing what is possible and potential in the country, and with the indigenous grapes, and to really help create a new trend, I'd like to say. And so we're going to dive into just five wineries, five faces behind it. But it's also important to mention it's people like you and people who are watching today. You are also equally a part of this renaissance because it takes consumers to really change the game. But let me get
Johnny, could I just say, if it takes consumers, then all the thanks has to go to Foti because he single-handedly brought the Greek wine industry up in America.
Yes, it's all you and Foti.
with just his intake.
My intake. But Johnny, before we get going real quickly, can I just make a point about the perspective of, we get this question all the time. You just mentioned something that's very important. Greece has been making wine for thousands of years, but why all of a sudden it was like lost and then it was reborn again? And I think that what has to be noted is that, world events has really suppressed Greece's wine culture over the centuries. So, if you're a historian and you want to look back of what happened, I think that we just need to kind of include the fact that, Greece was under occupation for 400 years by the Ottoman Empire, which, that was, a big factor. And then moving forward, Greece went through some hardships with 2 world wars, civil war, dictatorship, and so forth, that, the industry couldn't really thrive because of all these world events, historical events. And then as Greece kind of came out of that darkness is where I think they started to come up to realize that, there was an opportunity to revive
Yeah, because again, it's all about, winemaking starts as an agricultural product, and and it went under Ottoman rule. Like I don't think winemaking was really allowed. Like you were it wasn't allowed at all. And during that same period of time, if you look at France, they were thriving. That was like their golden age, and they were making a lot of the chateaus in Bordeaux and Burgundy. They've been around for hundreds of years. And even George Skouras, I was reading an interview with him. He had a quote that it takes 100 years to like make really good wine, because it has to, it's part of the culture, it's part of the landscape, it's part of the vines need to mature and ripen.
Evolution.
Exactly, it's a whole evolution, it's a whole process. So that's why these changes happen very slowly. They happen over a long period of time, and it's something that it's not easy. It's not doesn't happen overnight. So it might seem like it's happening overnight, but this has been a slow transition, a slow process. But there's been, yeah, definitely a few key players that have made it possible. So give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen here, and I can talk a little bit about some things. Alrighty. So I always like to say it's time for Greece. This is how I always start these off. So here's a map of Greece, just so we can kind of talk about where we're going, which wineries we're going to be talking about as we dive in. So the first winery and winemaker I want to talk about is George Skouras. So he comes from this little area, Nemea, which is really close to Athens, near Attiki. This is actually one of the first wineries that the diamond importers worked with in the early 90s. So founded by George Skouras, he is a Dijon-trained winemaker. So he learned how to make wine in France, and he brought that winemaking skills and knowledge to Greece. So he began working with both indigenous and international varieties, working with definitely high-quality Greek wines, Greek varietals. And his focus was always on Moscofilero and Aioritiko, so two of the most prominent varieties of that region. So when he started, I mean, there was very few producers in Greece that were making world-class wine of any kind in the region. Mainly, it was wines that were about table wines, things you would have at home, things you would share with friends, like stuff that was just meant to be on the table, casual, nothing with much emphasis on the quality, and more just on flavor, right? And just making it good and nice and easy. But because of his training, he got an enology degree from Dijon and Burgundy, and he put together all his resources he could to build a winery because he believed in the terroir of Greece. He believed in the indigenous varieties and their potential. If you fast forward to now, he's actually the president of the Greek Wine Federation. So he's a person who believes in helping grow and train a whole generation of winemakers. So you could argue that as a result of his focus and passion, he's been able to push the envelope and train other people to become these world-class winemakers. So that's something that's really kind of special. And he left definitely a big mark on the industry.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So his flagship wine, it launched in 1988, which was Megasinos, and that was one of the first wines in Greece to blend Aioritiko with Cabernet Sauvignon. And he has wineries at actually 3,400 feet. So he has some of the tallest red wine vineyards in all of Europe. And when he began his career in the 1980s, like I said earlier, there was only 70 wineries in all of Greece. And today there's now 1,600. So it's important to note, like, when people like him that are passionate and are push the envelope, they are responsible for kind of building these trends. And he's definitely one person to really thank. And he really believes in the landscape. He believes in the terroir. This is him in his vineyard. If you ever go and visit him, he always makes you put his arms out like this. He's like, be one with the vines. That's what he's doing there. You could feel like the way the sun hits you, and that's how the vines are being kind of treated in that part of Greece. So this is him and the vineyards in Nemea.
That's awesome.
Yeah. What else?
What a fascinating landscape.
Yeah,
I love it over there.
Beautiful.
So Johnny, you mentioned about Megasinos being one of the first blends of Aioritiko and Cabernet, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was the first, I think the first one, the first wine to blend both Aioritiko and Cabernet.
It makes me think about the comparison of, could we say that as the Italians in Tuscany blend Sangiovese and Cabernet, call it Super Tuscan, could this be the introduction to a Super Nemean?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's not classified as Nemea because in Nemea, you have to be 100% Ioritico.
Right, right.
This is definitely for sure. You could call it a super Nemea because by adding a little Cabernet, I think it does change the flavor profile a lot to become more, I think, palatable to like a more international palate. Like that, when it makes to me, you have the best of Greek wine and Greek flavor, but also with a more New World approach. So it kind of has like the best of both worlds, which I think makes it accessible to a lot of different types of palates.
Sure.
That's something that he did that was very pioneering for the wine industry in Greece, was taking that international approach, showcasing unique Greek varieties, but combining it with these indigenous international grapes. And that helped push the envelope and brings these wines out into, you know, a whole different ball game. So that was actually the first wine that Diamond Wines imported to United States. And it kind of also helped increase the perception of Greek wines as a whole. And that model really took off. You now see a lot of other wineries throughout the country starting to follow his lead, take that approach, incorporate, you know, French oak barrels, American oak barrels into their wineries to kind of add that into their repertoire of ingredients. And here's a picture of his son, Dimitris Skouras, who is going to be the next generation. You know, he's been making his own blends, taking over some winemaking, which has been kind of fun. It's been cool to see the passing of the torch. And you know, Greeks always are in the family business, so it's very similar there as well. So Dimitris is that next generation. You know, you had these winemakers like George and Paris Sagalis and the other winemakers we'll talk about. They started this next wave of winemaking in the 80s and 90s, and now today you have a whole new wave of winemakers, and they're doing, you know, natural wine, wild fermentation, orange skin contact wine. So, you know, Greece is going to be on the cutting edge, I think, of trends, but it's always about kind of combining this history, their heritage, and adding it to a more modern approach, which has been fun to see that whole transition happen.
Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, I wanted to move next to Santorini. This is our boy Paris Sagalis. So he's the creator of Sagalis Winery. That is one of the most iconic winery on Santorini. And he gets a lot of credit for being the godfather of modern winemaking on the island. So his story goes, he actually was a math teacher, and he was studying in Paris, France, how to teach math. While he was living there, he found a passion for wine, because, you know, if you're in France, you're surrounded by wine everywhere you go, whether you're having lunch at a cafe or having a fancy dinner. You know, France embodies the wine culture through and through. And I think that's something that was unique. You know, he was there in, I think, the 60s or 70s, where Greece didn't have that, like, I think, that focus on fine wine. While they drank a lot of wine, it was good wine. It wasn't a focus on that fine craft. And he wanted to bring that to Greece. So he comes back to fast forward, he goes back to Santorini. He's a math teacher, and making wine was really just a hobby for him, something he did in his backyard, in his family's vineyards. People started to catch on that he was making some amazing things. And that's led him to build his own winery. And they built it in the early 1990s. And as a result, he is a pioneer for lots of different things on the island, and always staying true to the ancient techniques. You know, growing it in the basket method, like you see in this picture on the left, growing the vines low to the ground. He incorporated organic farming in his vineyard since 1994, before organic was cool. You know, that was part of his founding principles. Always marrying that relationship between tradition, the traditional Santorini vineyards, but then using the best winemaking practices. So after he built the winery in 1991, and they added state-of-the-art equipment, stainless steel tanks, all the necessary tools you need to make a wine of high caliber and quality. So, you know, because of that, Santorini has now followed suit, and the trend has definitely moved in that direction, where now Santorini is known for producing some of the best wines in Greece, and especially of Assyrtiko, the Assyrtiko variety. I mean, people know Assyrtiko all over the world, and Santorini put it on the map. But it was because of the pioneers like Paris Sagalis, who followed their passion, followed their heart, followed their taste, never sacrificing quality. And by combining tradition with modern techniques, to create something very special and memorable.
There's a very, I have like this kind of image in my head that if a winemaker had a previous life, the fact that he was a math teacher makes me feel more confident in him as a winemaker. I don't know why. I think it's because of the precision, because that math is the one true language of the universe. It's like things are 2 + 2 is 4, no matter what you do, no matter what you say. And somebody who's a math teacher knows those types of precisions, those types of things, that he could put that into his winemaking. I don't know if you guys share that, but like I feel
I was definitely going to make a comment to your point, Ari, is the fact that I was going to ask Johnny, the fact that he was a math teacher has contributed to him becoming a great winemaker.
Yeah, it has to.
I mean, it has to. I mean, it means he's a smart guy. He has the wherewithal. He has logic, and I think with winemaking, but winemaking kind of, it's a combination of all these things. It's math, right? Because you need to understand the levels of alcohol. You need to understand the amount of time it takes to ferment. You need to understand the temperature levels in order to get a clean process. But it's also science, right? It's fermentation, it's biology, it's culture. It's also just culture too. It's passing on these generational techniques from generation to generation. So it's a combination of all these things. And I think it's similar to math, but it's also way different. So maybe for him, it was a way to kind of break out of that, like, 2 + 2 = 4, and be more one with nature, because nature doesn't always follow rules. It kind of makes its own rules.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. So he has the foundation. He has the foundation that I like.
Yeah. But especially on Santorini, I mean, they grow their wines. It's crazy the way they grow their vines. I mean, they're on the ground, they're on the floor. They grow in such a traditional way. It's wild. It's really like, I mean, I wish I had more pictures to share here, but that's a vineyard behind him. Like, that's so wild and rugged. It's not like in other parts of the world. It's like you see the vines that are in these very precise rows. Here, it's not. It's this precision, but it's also about having intuition. It's also about trusting tradition, trusting nature, and that's what Santorini is all about. I mean, it's a volcanic island, has no rainfall. It's super windy and dry. The elements are pretty harsh. So by just trusting nature to do its course and trusting tradition, because this is a way they've been growing vines like this for thousands of years. But today, adding that element of high quality wineries and high quality winemaking facilities, you get the best of both worlds. So it took someone like him to have like a really solid vision of the future, and to know what it takes to make a good wine, to combine that with this history and heritage. I think that's what makes him so special, and what makes Domaine Segala such a iconic place. And actually, just this week, they were announced top 100 wineries of the year in Wine and Spirits magazine.
Oh, wow.
So that's something that they've gotten that accolade before, and their wines are consistently getting great reviews. But for being one of the top 100 wineries in the world, they're doing something right. And I think the reason they got that accolade is because of that attention to detail, that precision, but also by combining tradition with modern technology. So to me, that's where you get this awesome myriad of flavor, of sophistication, of power in the wines. And yeah.
Excellent.
And also, one thing to mention, so if you can't tell, those are red grapes in the background of that picture. He is also one of the few winemakers to help bring back the little known, almost extinct red grapes of Santorini, Manvro-Tragano. So Manvro-Tragano was nearly extinct, and Santorini is most famous for the white wines, Assyrtiko, also Aetheri and Idani are the 3 white indigenous grapes of Santorini. But he helped bring back a nearly extinct grape, and now they produce a few red wines, the MM, which is a blend of Manvro-Tragano and Mandilaria, and then a single varietal Manvro-Tragano, which is a very beautiful red wine, a lot of earthy characteristics, that volcanic terroir, and by kind of exploring that. What's that?
It's pretty intense. It's one of my favorites when I can actually get my hands on it.
Yeah, we don't bring much here. I mean, you might get 5, 10, 20 cases. It's very rare.
Yeah,
because they don't grow much. Yeah, it's expensive because it's so the yields are so low, and Imagine bringing a grape back from extinction, finding these wild cuttings and plantings and parts of these random vineyards and bringing.
You guys just sold me. I need to get this wine.
In my opinion, it's worth every penny.
Yeah, we just got to think about the history behind something like that. It's amazing. Well, cool, guy. I want to move on to Crete. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Here.
My partial motherland.
Yeah. So Crete is one of my favorite places, and it's home to a variety of indigenous grapes, a unique history, a unique culture and heritage. My family comes from Lesbos, but I feel like I kind of wish they were from Crete just so I could go and travel there more often. I love Lesbos, don't get me wrong. Crete is just, there's always something new to explore. It's the biggest island in Greece. It's home to a variety of indigenous varieties. And it has a very unique history of winemaking. But let's talk about the Douloufakis family, because they are definitely considered some of the pioneers of modern Cretan winemaking. So the winery was started by Dimitris Douloufakis. He built the winery in 1930. And then his son, George, took over in 1960. But then Nikos, who's in this picture here, he took over the winery in 1933. So that's a picture of him in the early 90s.
Wait, 1933?
1993, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was like, that guy looks good.
Yeah.
Make sure you're paying attention.
93. So like a lot of the other winemakers we talked about today, they studied abroad, right? Because since Greece didn't have a tradition of high quality winemaking until modern times, a lot of these awesome pioneers of winemaking studied abroad. George Skoura studied in Dijon, France. Paris also in France, and then Nikos Douloufakis, he studied in Piemonte in Italy, in northern Italy. And he actually graduated from the Enological School in Alba, which is in northern Italy. So his family's wineries and vineyards went through a lot of transition. In 1977, phylloxera decimated much of Crete, so their wineries all had to be replanted and changed. So they began replanting in the 80s, and he continued to help kind of lead that transition to growing these new vineyards throughout the late 80s and early 90s. And then when he took over in 1993, his focus was really about replanting and working with a lot of the indigenous grapes of the island, like Liatico, which is a red grape. And thinking about his studying in Italy, it kind of makes sense, because I feel like Liatico does have a lot of similarities to Barbera d'Alba and some of those northern Italian reds. Like, it's really earthy, structured. So he focused on replanting those varieties and then built a state-of-the-art winery in 1996. So again, built the similar story from producer to producer, which is combining these ancient indigenous grapes, but building state-of-the-art facilities that help tell the story of the grape. Because if you have a better facility, a better winery, you could produce better tasting wine. It's cleaner. You have more finesse, more focus. And then in the early 2000s, he started replanting Vidiano. So Vidiano, even though it's been in Crete for hundreds and hundreds of years, it's only really been a focus for almost the last 20 years. So think about that. We're witnessing something today, which is a whole changing of what is considered, the indigenous, what's considered the important grapes of the country. So about 20 years ago, working with Vidiano, replanting Liatico, you're seeing these indigenous ancient grapes kind of tell a new story and take a new form. And it's because of people like him that kind of focused on telling the story of the past, where previous winemakers were focusing more on the international varieties. His focus was definitely on the ancient varieties and telling that story.
I'm looking at this picture and I'm like, so what's off about this picture? And then I realized he's in a field of snow.
Yeah. Crete, and where he grows is in these high elevation vineyards on the mountains of Dafnes, the Dafnes region in Crete. And you have pretty high elevation in Crete. Even though Crete is the southernmost island, it stays pretty warm most of the year. But in the winters, at high elevation, you have snow caps on some of these mountains up until like May or June. So that's something people don't always realize, is that Greece has 4 seasons. Even though it is a Mediterranean climate, you do have snow. It's kind of rare to have big snowfall like this, but it does get fairly cool. I mean, he's not wearing a parka, you can see.
Yeah.
It's not like frigid cold, but yeah, they do have some snowfall for sure.
So cool.
And one thing I love to mention about his winery is that they've always focused on organic winemaking. So their wineries were organic since the 90s, and incorporating that into their practices has been a very important to the core of what they do. And that helped, again, pave the way and inspired other winemakers to follow suit.
And if I can make a quick point in that slide right before, look, the soil composition, you know, how sandy and gravelly that looks, which is ideal, I'm assuming, for healthy grape growing. You said organic, so if it's the drier it is, the better, I think, and healthier it is for the vines, right?
Yeah, but also, you know, what's cool about Crete is that they have this amazing weather. It's very windy, you know, especially up in the mountains, and being close to at the bottom of the Mediterranean, you have this nice wind that helps keep pests away, which is important when you're making organic wine, because to make organic wine is just not using pesticides. So you have to use nature to help, you know, keep the vineyards pest free. That's something that's been that happens here, you know, utilizing nature and utilizing Mother Nature to basically help produce these fantastic grapes, not using as much sulfur as you might find in other wines. And yeah, I mean, that's been fun for me to see this whole story follow for winemaking in Crete.
Yeah. So cool.
Yeah. So next is a pretty powerful family I want to talk about. Oh, my light turned off in here. I'm like, the sensor light. Here we go. Now I can read. I had to like clap on and clap off. So the Buttari family is a iconic family, and any story about pioneers is not complete without the Buttari family being a part of that conversation. So the Buttari family, they've been making wine in Greece since the 1800s. So they're one of the longest and oldest winemaking families in Greece. You know, the Buttari family has wineries all over the country. But in 1970, Yanni Buttari, who's on the right, he planted 40 hectares of land, vineyards in 1970 in Yanakahori, which is a village in Nausa, in the region of Nausa. And this ended up becoming the estate. Because in 1997, Stelios and Yanni Buttari, they kind of split from the rest of the family to build their own estate, build their own brand. And that's when Kyriani was formed in 1997. And together, you know, Yannis Buttari is one of the most iconic people and winemakers in Greece. He's a very loud personality, very rambunctious guy. He's really awesome to be around. He actually was the mayor of Thessaloniki. So even politically, he's had a lot of influence in Greece. And definitely a well-known figure in the industry. He's written a book about his life. I mean, he's a very interesting dude. If you ever get to meet him, it's an honor. You know, he's well known all over Greece for just being an important key figure of winemaking as a whole. But what it's been really cool to see is when Stelios took over as the managing director of the winery in 1999, which is his son, we got to see a lot of different change happen. Where, you know, Yanni Buttari was a great winemaker and a great businessman, but Stelios, I think, had this amazing vision of how to showcase Greek wines, Greek ancient indigenous varieties, but show them in a new modern way. So they built a state-of-the-art winery. They acquired more land around the area. So they ended up building they have one of the largest estates in Greece. And they also have vineyards in Amyntaio, which is the northern, a region in northern Greece. And Stelios Buttari runs the show now. His brother Michalis also participates and works with the vineyard management. He studied at UC Davis.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and then that's when they focus a lot on Zino Mavro. And there are two figures of really showcasing the beauty of that grape and making it an important piece of the Greek winemaking story.
Can I just ask, when his brother was at UC Davis, you know how like all college kids have this, like they just go and get like the cheapest beer or whatever to party with? Did he like have like all this cool wine to like offer everybody?
Probably. I mean, that's what you definitely, if you work for if you have a winery, you definitely one of the cooler kids out there for sure. Yeah, so Stelios also works with the Greek Wine Federation, Winemakers Federation. He's a really believer. He always talks about growing the pie. You know, a lot of times Greeks are very competitive with each other. And, you know, it is a competitive industry, the wine industry. But as a whole, his focus has been on educating consumers all across the world on the beauty of Greek wine and growing a bigger pie, so that they're encouraging other winemakers or other growers to build wineries to help tell that story, because an industry doesn't exist with just 70, 80 wineries. You need a bunch of wineries to be able to tell that true story. So he's definitely a pioneer of that. And you've seen, again, after he built his winery in 1997, there's now dozens of wineries in Nausa that followed suit, producing lots of different styles of the grape. And Zito Mavro has definitely been one of the focuses for them. And yeah, I mean, there were, before people like him, you know, people weren't in getting involved in the wine business because it was a farming business. But now, you know, the industry is sexy. It's cool. It's like they're doing cool things. So I think that encouraged a lot more people to kind of get behind it and to continue to push the envelope and produce really awesome wines. And a lot of that is attributed also to, you know, the diaspora of Greeks all over the world. You know, people now like you and me here in where, you know, you're in Massachusetts, DC, I'm in New York. There's Greeks all over, and they want to bring that flavor of Greece home and share with their friends. So people like him that kind of tell that story. He travels all over the world to show that story with Greeks and non-Greeks alike, to just, again, tell that message, share that story. I saw someone has a question. What are the chances you can run into these winemakers if you're traveling in these wineries? The answer is, yeah, most likely they're there. I mean, Stelios is in his wineries all the time, especially now during harvest. It's a very crucial time of the year where they need to pick the grapes. They need to make sure they are harvested correctly, you know, that everything is going smoothly, because, you know, it's a natural process. You want to control it and make sure everything is going smoothly. So yeah, they're always there. So definitely, if you're traveling to Greece, you can reach out to me. I'd be happy to make a connection with you and to make a reservation at one of these wineries for a tasting. And hopefully you'll get lucky and you might be able to meet one of the winemakers.
They're almost like rock stars. It's like, get a peek of them when you get to the winery. Exactly. Like, I saw Stelio.
Actually, on my last trip, I was in Greece a few weeks ago, a month ago, and Yanni was there, Yanni Boutari. We got to chat about wine. It was very fun and great to meet him.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah. And then the final guy I wanted to mention is the team at Alpha State. So Angelos Yatridis is one of the pioneers, again, of winemaking. He's considered one of the most iconic producers in northern Greece. And he studied in Bordeaux, France. And there, I mean, he learned how to make grapes like Cabernet, Sauvignon Blanc, Cab Franc, Merlot, the classic Bordeaux varieties. And in the winery at Alpha Estate, they work a lot with Sauvignon Blanc as well, actually. It's one of the main international varieties they work with. But he knew he wanted to build a winery. For him, it was something that he was sought out. So when he went back to Greece. He was trying to find where is the best terroir, where's the best place to make great wines. And he wanted to find one of the coolest climate areas in Greece, and that they settled on Midion. So him and Makis Mavridis, who's the viticulturist who manages the vineyards, they built it in 1997. They basically bought land from like, I think 80 to 100 or something small growers, and they were able to kind of put it all together to build this very beautiful estate. And today they have about 87 hectares of vines that they kind of acquired piece by piece to build this amazing estate. So for him, the focus is on finding an amazing land, and then they completely transformed it, where now they manage one of the most meticulously organized vineyards I've ever seen, not just for Greek standards, but for, again, a global standard. It's a very meticulously organized land. So that's Angelos on the left and Makis on the right. And Angelos, he was a third generation. His father was a pastry maker for 3 generations. So he was always surrounded by gastronomy and food. So he always wanted to work in that industry. But he was encouraged to go to study winemaking, moved to Bordeaux in 1990 to become, to learn how to become a winemaker. And after he came back to Greece and they acquired all that land, it's definitely been all up and coming from there, because they produce, again, some of the most precise wines. They focus a lot on Xinomavro, Malagusia, other indigenous Greek varieties, and then international grapes like Sauvignon Blanc. They also work with some Chardonnay, Syrah,
and John,
as well.
Could we quickly mention about the cool project that they got going with the portfolio of wines from the ecosystem?
Yeah, the ecosystem line. So that's all about showing the terroir of Emilion, because Emilion was, it's such a unique place, and he is definitely the main winemaker in that region. It's all Alpha State Angelos he's the guy of Emilion. So the ecosystem line is a cool project he has, where he has single vineyard, single varietal expressions grown from different plots of land, and for him it's all about showcasing the terroir of and the ecosystem of Emilion. So it's cool. He has a Pinot Noir. He has old vine Xinomavro that's grown on 100-year-old ungrafted vines. The Sauvignon Blanc Fumé, barrel aged. Chardonnay. So it's pretty cool when you get into Nat. He has experimental vineyards as well, where he grows varieties that I've never even heard of. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to see. And someone asked, do they study in France and Italy? Does anyone study in Greece? Yeah, so Greece does now have some amazing wine schools. Thessaloniki has an amazing viticulture school where that next generation of winemakers is studying. So those first Renaissance guys, they definitely had to go abroad to bring that heritage and experience and information to Greece. But now, the new wave, people that are going to school now, the younger generation, they're able to learn in Greece, because you have a foundation of these well-trained pioneers that know what they're doing. So people now from other parts of the world go to Greece to learn how to make wine. So that's been kind of cool to see. I even have people who work in the wine industry, and actually in Boston, they actually worked in George Scoris's winery for the harvest to see how they do wines there. And at one point, I'm definitely going to want to go to Santorini. I'd love to learn how they make their wines there. So it's definitely all coming full circle. I think it's only going to go up from here, because I have the last slide. I forgot to I have a couple more. I forgot to mention something. So let me go back to sharing my screen.
And then before you share that screen, Johnny, can we also make the point that as far as like credibility in education, doesn't Greece actually have 2 Master of Wine?
2 what?
2 Masters of Wine.
Yeah. There's some master sommeliers of wine. I forget their names, but
there's I think one is
Yanis something.
Lazarakis is one of them. I think he was the first one that actually opened the doors, where that's like the most honorable position you can get in the wine world.
How many masters of wine are there?
I think there's a little over 300 in the world.
Really?
Not many.
Yeah, 300 in the world. So yeah,
wow.
Mr. Lazarakis is the first one, and then there's a second gentleman that was not too long after that, that is also a master of wine. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's a third individual who's a female that is reached that level.
Well, it's important for Greeks have been making wine for thousands of years. So if anyone should be masters of wine, we have such a rich culture and heritage. It's important for us, as Greeks, to kind of help tell that story, for sure.
Is this a question that you could answer quickly? What does it take to become a master of wine?
It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of practice. I mean, I'm a certified sommelier, so I'm like a intro level, compared to these guys. But I look at you, Johnny, and I'm like, this dude knows his stuff. My God, like he knows everything. I had to read a lot.
You're like entry level.
I had to read a lot of books. I had to taste a lot of wine. I had to practice service. It's a lot of different things that go into becoming a sommelier. But to become a master, you have to know the exact villages in Burgundy. You have to know the angle of the slope of the vineyard, or the way the sun hits it. You have to know all these things and how it relates to producing good wine. I mean, it's an abundance of knowledge that takes a lot of work. a lot of studying, a lot of practice, a lot of drinking. Not
Well,
easy. You really have to just completely dedicate yourself fully.
and
That's
from what I
amazing.
understand, these individuals have this unique sense to be able to, from the smell and sip of a wine, blindly can tell you everything about it.
Yeah, I mean, you could, by smelling it, you're supposed to tell the climate it comes from, the country, the year, the
Come on,
variety.
is that real?
Yeah.
You got to pass that
Incredible.
test in order to achieve that level.
Blind tasting is fun. You guys should try it. I've done it a couple times. I'm not as so good at telling you where exactly it's from, but I could sometimes
Ari,
get grape and.
Don't be confused with blind tasting at a nightclub.
I could taste a wine and be like, "Yep, this is wine," and that's about the extent of what I could do.
I just want to finish off this real quick about talking about pioneers. So I want to mention quickly Ted Diamantes. You know, he's the owner of Diamond Importers, and he was definitely a pioneer as well, because it took someone like him to help channel and champion telling the story of Greek wines. So he's been, you know, for the last 25 years, been touring the country, teaching people about Greek wines, sommeliers, the American consumer, and that has allowed the industry here to really kind of grow and blossom. And it takes people to kind of get behind these winemakers in Greece to tell that story. And it's just important to mention Ted, because he's done an amazing job. Also Urban Wine Club, Greek Wine Club. We love to tell the story. So, you know, I try my best to do my part.
So I was going to say, just to say real quick, we did do an interview with both Johnny and Ted.
Yes.
On an episode, I think it was Connecting Greeks, if I'm not mistaken. So if you guys want to hear more about Ted and actually hear him speak, check out that episode, which is on our sites and apps and everything. And Johnny's in there too.
And then last but not least, it's the consumers and the professionals. I mean, this wouldn't be anywhere if it weren't for people like you who are learning, who take the time to listen to someone like me talk about Greek wine, to go into a wine store and order something you've never heard of before and ask a question about it. I mean, that's the point. That's where it comes full circle. So for everyone out there who's you know, trying something new, breaking out of their comfort zone, asking questions and championing these wines, thank you. Thank you for being there, and thank you for helping us to tell our story. And yeah, I just wanted to end it with that.
Absolutely. I think before we do end this segment, Johnny, there's one more question for you.
Yeah. So I mentioned wine tasting. What is a proper way to taste wines at a wine tasting? Are you really supposed to spit each time out before tasting next? So, you know, a lot of these professional wine tastings, you could be tasting up to 100 wines, maybe sometimes even 1,000. I mean, I've been to these giant tasting rooms where you have 100 winemakers and each one has 10 wines. So you have to pick and choose what you want to taste. But if you're drinking everything, by the end of it, all the wine is just going to be good.
Yeah.
So if you are trying to evaluate a wine for its value, for its flaws, for its characteristics, spitting out the wine is just a way for you to keep your stamina up. If you're tasting only 5 or 6 wines in a flight, okay, and it's casual, sure, swallow it. You know, I'm not going to say spit it out all the time, but you know, if you are drinking a lot, it's, you know, but also the wine's amazing, you know, swallow it for sure.
On that note, I was actually at Foti's wine shop last week, and he had a vendor with a bunch of wines, and she's like, "Do you want to taste as well?" And I'm like, "Sure." And I'm drinking and swallowing everything, and Foti's spitting everything out. I was like, "Okay, maybe I'm doing something wrong here." I can't get, like, obviously I'm not anybody who's in a position of expert knowledge, but I cannot get the flavor or the characteristics unless I swallow. So it's like, I'm just not there yet. If I spit it out, I can't tell.
Like for me, like swallowing, when you swallow, you're kind of also breathing into your mouth. So for me, when I'm like tasting it, it's important to like keep breathing through your nose, because I feel like that allows you to get a lot of those flavors. And usually I swallow like a little bit. Like it's impossible to not swallow.
Yeah.
Even if you spit it out, there's always gonna be something left in your mouth.
Right.
So like I'm still swallowing a little bit, but like I definitely try to spit out the bulk of it if I'm doing a big tasting.
Yeah,
but,
so basically you don't want to get like sloppy drunk while you're doing these tastings.
Yeah, or like if it's before work and you're gonna start tasting wines, like a lot of sommeliers at a restaurant, they'll taste wines at like 11 a.m. and then have to work the rest of the day. So they spit out too, because they don't want to, you know.
That's a very good point, actually.
Well,
Yeah, I wish I could get that point.
Excellent.
Well, yeah, well, that's it. I think, you know, it's important to recognize and pay homage to these people, these faces, these pioneers that help us be able to get wines like that we have today. And also, you know, there's that next wave of winemakers that are going to be there continuing this from generation to generation. So we hope and we expect that wines from Greece will continue to get better and better. And we have to just, you know, think about the people who dedicate their lives to this and thank them for, you know, the hard work they do. So
absolutely. And I can't wait to do one of these webinars, virtual, in person, but in a few years, where you're going to be talking about the people who are taught and trained in Greece, because I think that's going to be really cool.
That's gonna be awesome.
All right. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Johnny. You always, for me personally, like, I learned so much, and I'm sure everybody out there does as well. You always bring that knowledge. You always like tell it in a fun, entertaining way, and we want to thank you so much for being with us, our official host. So we want to thank you.
It's always good to be here with you guys.
And if you want to hear more from Johnny and Ted, like I said, we have a segment with them on our Connecting Greeks podcast. So look that up, because it's a really good segment. And also, we've done a segment with Stelio Boutari. So if you want to learn more about Stelios, we did a great segment with him. So just look it up on Greek Wine Club or Urban Wine Club. And I want to say thank you to Johnny once again. Always, you're awesome, Johnny. Thank you. Foti, you're the man.
Ari, if I can just add real quickly that
Absolutely.
we mentioned every single winemaker that we just discussed, we have their wines on the platform on Greek Wine Club and Greekazon. So if this is something that really changed your perspective about Greek wines, you can definitely try their wines by browsing the selections on both platforms.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Foti. Thank you, everybody out there, for watching, listening. The podcast video will be up. Thank you so much. Until next time, which will have something cool for you. And hopefully Johnny will be with us again. Thanks, everybody out there, for watching and listening. We will see you next time.
Take care, everyone.
Cheers.